Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session on financing Indigenous agriculture as part of the Indigenous Agricultural Innovation Conference. My name is Heather Exner Pro. I'm a board member with the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network, and we're great partners with FHQ Development. So it's my privilege to be here today to moderate this fantastic panel on a very important but often overlooked issue. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from the Tsuut'ina Nation outside of Calgary today. But as it's a virtual conference, all of our speakers are in different locations, and they'll let you know what territories they're speaking from today, too. So without any further ado, I'm going to get into introducing our wonderful speakers, and we're going to have a great discussion about what some of the issues and challenges and opportunities are in financing Indigenous agriculture. So to begin with, we have Nevon Faucer from the Royal Bank of Canada. We have Shannin Metawabin from Naca, and we have Jennifer Sutherland from SIEDN. And I'm going to first pass it over to Nevon, and Nevon's going to start, and each of our panelists will tell you a little bit about themselves and their organization and how they're involved in Indigenous agriculture, and then we'll get started on the good discussion. So Nevon, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect, thanks Heather. Yes, it's a great honor to be part of this, but I wanted to start off by just acknowledging that I am sitting on Treaty 4 lands and respect the rights of all First Nations and Métis communities. So I think that's important for all of us to acknowledge as we start on this. Now we get into the formal piece. Again, my name's Nevon Faucer. I'm a senior commercial account manager at Royal Bank based here in Regina. I'm a Saskatchewan farm boy, fundamentally, is where I came from. U of S background, College of Ag, been with Royal Bank 23 years. Kind of always in the ag industry, or at least one foot in the ag industry. The portfolio I manage now is really a portfolio of very large commercial ag clients who are primary agriculture, farmers, but as well as lots of the agribusiness and the value chain, literally from field to fork and everything in between. So that's primarily the portfolio I work in. I do work in a lot of other industries that kind of KBI, public sector, kind of different as well. If it's kind of a large and complex, it ends up in my world. So which kind of fits nicely into kind of what we're all trying to accomplish here is we have First Nations that are really working in the First Nations background, and then we have ag, which is really two separate industries. And then we're going to put them together, because I know when you look at Royal Bank, we work things based on vertical markets. We've got real estate specialists, public sector specialists, we have First Nations specialists, and then we have people who are ag specialists. So we have different silos. And my role is, I'll be honest, I kind of work in kind of a bit of them all and kind of bring you and look forward to the conversation and the panel we have today.
Great, thank you so much, Nevon. And next, Shannin, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and the work of Naca in this field.
Thank you. Just wanted to check the connection first. Mine's coming a little bit slow, but can you guys hear me okay still? Okay, gusto mi ibagat na goyan sa bitchi ayamian. Anamot man nahtagot chagayan inanogosche. So Shannin Metawabin is my name. I'm the CEO of the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations Association. I'm going to let Jennifer speak specifically to the financing that's available through the AFIs, but I'll just speak briefly about the different things that we're working at the national level to try to increase available capital and supports for the agricultural industry. Naca supports about 10% of our loans on an annual basis to agriculture type lending. And we're trying to improve that because it's a relatively growth area, if we can say that, but it's always lacked capital. It's always lacked supports from the government. I think one of the questions that we're going to talk about is probably governmental supports that can be created to enable Indigenous entrepreneurs to think about agriculture as an option. But at the national level, I was brought in with a mandate to increase financing for the network. The network has been operating for more than 35 years. They started with a government contribution that created the network. And since that time, it's grown to 59 Aboriginal financial institutions from coast to coast to coast. We have 5 Inuit financial institutions. We have 5 Métis specific, and the remaining are across providing multiple heritage group loans and industry specific lending. They've processed probably 50,000 loans plus to 3 billion in lending, but they've always been managing a small capital base and identifying a mechanism to ensure that we can grow that capital base has been always an issue for the network. So we work with government and we work with our Crown partners, and Naca created an Indigenous Growth Fund, so a private sector instrument that allows the private sector to participate in Indigenous lending. Now, it's a general business instrument, so it'll provide AFIs that lack the capital to take out loans from this fund and reissue them to Indigenous entrepreneurs. But what this does is it allows each AFI to think about expanding and increasing the size of their lending. They're not managing the small capital base anymore, waiting for loans to be repaid before they issue new loans. They can actually take out a loan and issue larger sums to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And this is good timing right now because our Indigenous entrepreneurs are becoming, are creating larger businesses, more complex businesses in sectors that they've never created before. So this is a very exciting time, but we also have to recognize that in the Indigenous community and the Indigenous business sector, what goes hand in hand with business is business support services, capacity, and equity participation in the lending. And that always buys down the risk of each and every loan. So those are the types of things that we do at the national level. Thank you.
That was great, Shannon. I learned a lot just from hearing you speak for the last few minutes, and I just have to agree that it is such an exciting time and good time for Indigenous business. And there's so much, there's so much opportunity in agriculture. I think, in particular, which is great that we're having this conversation and trying to figure out how we can provide better supports to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And so I'm going to pass it over, last but not least, over to you, Jennifer, to talk about yourself and about SIEF.
So I'm Jennifer. I work at SIEF, and we're located on Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon. I work as agriculture account officer. So what we do here is provide financing to Aboriginal entrepreneurs. What I do is mainly farm loans, so to both individuals and nations. So we have clients who have anywhere from small operations on their homes, and then we have clients who have like 200 head operations. So we really do it all for our clients. We offer flexible financing terms for our clients. They can repay yearly, annually, monthly, biweekly. It's up to them, whatever works for them. We're really here to really help our clients and support them through agriculture industry and to keep growing the businesses and to create long-term sustainability for their businesses as well. So that's what I do here at SIEF in the agriculture department.
Fantastic. Well, thanks all three of you for that introduction. And now we'll get started into some of the questions. So kind of thinking broadly and building on, the other sessions in this conference. But from a financial and investment lens, what kind of businesses in agriculture are you guys finding that are really starting to attract more capital? Where are the kind of high rewards areas that there's a need for more financing, that there could be a lot of opportunity from greater financing?
Well,
Nevon,
speaking
maybe
for myself, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You start, Jennifer. Perfect.
A lot of my clients want to get into cattle, and right now cattle are very inexpensive in the market right now because of the drought. So it really is a buyer's market right now, but it's also a bad climate for our clients to sell cattle because they're not making the returns on them that they would have in years previous.
And is it a similar from a financer's lens, similar to bison, or is it totally different business cases and business plans that you guys would compare between cattle and bison?
Well, at SIEF, we have had applications for bison, but no one has actually gone through with the whole process of purchasing bison. So my producers are mainly for cattle only.
Okay, interesting. Nevon, maybe I'll pass it over to you. What are you seeing kind of from the bigger bank perspective of where money from the market is going to in agriculture?
Yeah, so, so when you look at the ag market, and I use the analogy of the oil and gas industry. So if the oil and gas was at $200 a barrel, we'd be seeing a massive economic boom. We're seeing this in the ag market right now, right? Like we've had really strong commodity prices, and the industry is kind of somewhat pandemic proof. The people obviously aren't. But the industry itself, as the world is starting to understand there's a potential shortage of food, we're seeing a rise of prices. We've had some very strong years, outstanding, or the outlier of that would be 2021 was a bit of a challenging year with the drought throughout most of kind of Western Canada. But despite that, there is just a ton of capital coming into the ag market, and it's literally right from primary agriculture, from farmers expanding their land base, all the way up to the value chain. If you're, canola crush plants is a great example. That's at the far end of the chain. You look at Saskatchewan here, I think we've got $15-18 billion being invested on canola crush plants. And then there's kind of everything in between, right? There's lots of commodity brokers, different oat companies, all kinds of different things. So that's one of the things that I'm seeing right now is just there's a ton of investments being made, from traditional, investors who work in the ag industry, but there's also what I call lots of Bay Street money coming into the ag market, which is great to see, right? Because I've been in the ag market for 23 years, my whole life. And there was always that stigma, oh, that's the ag industry, right? But now it's, oh, you're in the ag industry, right? There's a much more upward trend, that's for sure. And we're seeing that because there's just so much investment coming in. So there's no real industry that's specific, other than it's a good place to get in. There's a lot of capital. There's lots of positive energy. So why would you not be part of it, kind of thing? So.
If I can just follow up before we get to Shannin, you said there's a stigma with the ag, sector, or there traditionally has been. What is the stigma? What is the reluctance or the hesitation from investors of investing in ag, and maybe what's changed in the last couple of years?
Yeah, this would be more broad ag, of course, not specific to the Indigenous market. But yeah, like I look at myself, been in the ag market for 20 plus years. At the beginning of my career, it's like, what do you do? Oh, I'm an ag lender, and people kind of looked a little bit, I wouldn't say looked down on you, but you just they looked very simple, right? But the reality is you look at some of the ag enterprises now, they're tens, 20, 30, hundreds of thousand acres, vertically integrated from field to fork kind of thing. So the industry has changed a lot, and a lot of that has changed that perception of just dealing with farmers to it's much more now. It's value add, it's peat processors and who ship food all over the world and export kind of thing. So that has been a real nice stigma has changed over the last, I don't know the time frame, probably I've noticed that in the last 20 years, that's for sure.
Interesting. So a bit of a shift from just the family farm to really sophisticated, globally competitive business.
Yeah, and we can do that here in Saskatchewan, obviously, right? Because historically we were just export, but now it's about participating in the value chain, right?
Super. And Shannin, what are you seeing kind of at a national level? You said that 10% of your investment goes to agriculture. What kinds of things does that look like?
Well, I think we got to sort of step back a little bit and just look at the industry and in a sense, Indigenous people haven't been part of agriculture. We've been removed completely from the agriculture sector with the policies and the legislation that's been put into place. We were primarily agriculture before contact, and it's basically a reclamation of this original industry that we're trying to reclaim. A lot of the discussion right now is more of the mainstream agriculture. I know that in Saskatchewan and in central Canada, agriculture is maintained, but I think there's still a lot of nations that don't have enough certainty to their land claims presently in the process of going through with the government. And if communities had more certainty to the lands that they had within their traditional territories, and right now there's more than 275 court cases that affirm rights and title to land, and Canada could do itself a big favor by assisting communities in providing certainty so that they can do the proper planning on the lands that they do have. Like there's still a lot of communities that just lease out their land because we've lost that capacity to grow, to raise cattle. before contact, we had vast fields growing. We had orchards. We collected nuts. We had hundreds and hundreds of varieties of different crops. Now this was us before contact. We were very wealthy. We had trade routes. We didn't need anything. But now we're at a point right now. We had the Indian Act implemented. We were removed from the rich soils and put into reserves in obscure places away from the railroad tracks. They created a policy that required us to lose access to machinery, so that we had to use hand impediments to raise crops. So they tried everything that they could to remove Indigenous people from the land, starving us. As the story of starvation of our people is huge, and the residential school story continues right now. So as Indigenous people start to reclaim their prosperity and start to look at opportunities, we're going to be gradually moving from this whole surviving on the day to day and experiencing the cycle of violence within our lives to start looking in the future and taking advantage of the capital that's available on the markets, uh, taking advantage of the lending that's available, and then looking at the land within your own nation as an opportunity to grow something or to raise something and have prosperity in the future. And I think this is what we're talking about right now, is making sure we have adequate business support services, have the right capacity and information, and then have all the financing that they need to be successful.
Well, I really appreciate you giving some of that historical context, Shannon, which is so important for this conversation. So thanks for that. And also, you brought up the issue of certainty and investor certainty. And I know in Canada, it's often looked upon that Indigenous peoples are the cause of uncertainty, but you rightfully pointed out that it's usually government policy, that's preventing investor certainty in Indigenous business and Indigenous territory, and they need to get their ducks in a row so that we can, have that growth and that prosperity for everyone. But building on what you just said, I might, move to our next question is, we know that a lot of First Nations, do have a lot of land, are getting more land through settlements. So let's talk about what are the assets instead of looking, there are lots of capital needs, but what is the level of assets that First Nations already have? And what do you think is needed to take it to the next level? How can we leverage the assets that First Nations have, to build a more successful, business model for Indigenous agriculture? And I don't know who wants to start. Maybe back to you, Jennifer.
Sure. There are a lot of asset uses on First Nations land right now. A lot of land claims are coming up and freeing up more land space. I know a lot of nations are leasing out their land right now, but there's actually been a lot of interest at the personal level for people who want to get into agriculture. So they're asking to take over the leases of the land on reserve, so they can start their own operations. So that's a big economic growth factor right there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there's a long history, and it goes to what Shannon talked about of kind of that disconnection that the government imposed of Indigenous peoples from doing agriculture. Now people are more interested in taking that over, and I think kind of passive lease holds was one method that we've been doing for the last decades, and now it's time for Indigenous farmers and producers to take back over their land. And I'm wondering, Nevon, from your perspective, as maybe a traditional banker perspective, what are the assets that you would look at when you look at First Nations lands and communities, and how they might, get more involved in agriculture?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And Jen, you kind of hit on it right off the bat. It's one of the big opportunities that most First Nation communities have is they have land, right? You have access, you have land. The question becomes, do you have full access to it and the rights to do with what you want to it? That may be for another conversation, but that is the opportunity, right? Is you have access to the land, some very large tracts of land, some in reserve status, some out, depending on where your structure is. And the other piece of it is you got access to people. You have massive, untapped opportunity for labor, right? Whether it's skilled or unskilled labor, and then you can leverage into the university and the tech industry that we have here in Saskatchewan to upskill those people. So that's the opportunity is access to land. Because if I look at myself wanting to start to farm, The challenge becomes just access to the land. So that's probably the first hurdle that you guys have access to. Now the challenge becomes, do you have, the full ability to manage that? And that might be for another day. But that is one of the opportunities in the Indigenous markets for sure, is you have access to some large tracts of land to turn it into whatever you want, whether it's cattle, whether it's bison, whether it's maybe you want to get into growing crops, irrigation. There's the sky's the limit kind of thing. So.
I'm glad you raised the point of, the access to labor. And I think, we all recognize and appreciate that, especially in rural areas where agriculture might be more concentrated, there is a younger and, more populous Indigenous demographic that can take over a lot of kind of the aging family farms and the aging kind of rural communities that we're seeing in a lot of places. So it's essential probably to, the future of Canadian agriculture is to do a better job of making it attractive, for Indigenous youth to think about agriculture as a career. So, Shannin, how about yourself? What are the assets that you see that First Nations have, and how can they leverage that, for a more, kind of prosperous or sophisticated business model?
I think nations have our land and rights. I think those are our assets. I think the colonized world became very wealthy from our lands. They've taken a lot of resources from it. We've never really been provided the rights entitled to those lands, and they were extracted for many centuries. Right now, we're seeing a wholesale change in that approach. You were talking about the uncertainty that Indigenous people bring, and it's the uncertainty is just that we're affirming our rights, we're asserting our rights, we're stepping up and saying we want of that prosperity from now on, and that in itself is the value that we're bringing now. Is we own the land and the resources that the resources are coming from, and this goes for major projects and resource types of businesses. It goes to agriculture. You saw the Clearwater deal, the Biller deal, the Mi'kmaq asserting their rights by creating a partnership that's going to long-term sustainability for their people. They're not going anywhere. They have rights entitled to the resources in the water. Makes perfect business sense. Now, I think this is what nations in other parts of the country need to do, is look in their backyards at what is the resource within their territories to be planning for, and creating those partnerships, creating those capacity programs to get their people ready, and taking that to the bank. Did you know that the highest risk financing right now is a bank providing a loan to a First Nations to participate in a resource project as an equity partner? It's considered the highest risk capital. That to me is the lowest risk capital. And we need to change that whole mentality about how we support First Nations to participate in the prosperity of Canada. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with you, Shannin, on, and I'm even surprised to hear that, although now thinking anecdotally, I do know with some particular cases, the financing rates were so high to get involved in a major project that the First Nations couldn't get involved. But I think, I think that's starting to evolve, and Nevon probably is, aware of that, and Jennifer too, of, ESG funds looking very favorably on having Indigenous participation, Indigenous equity, and hopefully, more funds loosen up for that in agriculture and everything. But, and building on that, then I think, we'll go to our next question. Just so the people watching this, and if communities or entrepreneurs are thinking about getting into agriculture, that what kind of money are we talking about? What is the scale? And Jennifer, you talked about, that there's a wide range from very kind of small ventures, you maybe just, making some bison jerky, out of your home, up to having, 200 head of cattle. And then I know, Nevon, you're involved in very mature agricultural businesses that would be in the tens of millions of dollars. So what kind of scale are we talking about? What kind of money would an entrepreneur or a community need to think about securing to get into what kind of levels of business? Jennifer, maybe we'll start small and start with you.
Sure. Well, at SIEF here, we don't do 100% financing. So limitation really is on the equity portion. We do require a 20% equity contribution, and for new clients, it always has to be liquid equity. So it has to be cash. So that's the main limitation for my clients. If they want 10 head of cattle or 100 head of cattle, they need 20% down towards their loan initially off the bat. And that's top of their operating costs, such as feed, fuel, vet costs, everything they need for the rest of the year, including fencing. So that is the main limitation. But once they have the equity down, really they can get. I've had clients who have purchased 10 head of cattle and worked their way up to 100 head of cattle over the course of a few years, reinvesting their equity back into their loans, back into their business, and then slowly growing operations that way. So it is a bit more accessible for the clients when they start small and then grow larger, rather than starting larger and then seeing the equity requirement and being discouraged from the start.
Thank you so much. And Shannon, how about you? What are you guys seeing at NACA, kind of looking at, across the country? What is the scale of money getting secured or being put into Indigenous agricultural projects? Oh, you're muted.
Like I said, we're at the beginning of this whole industry. I feel. I know that we've been at it. We've been doing what best we can at this point, but I don't think the programs and services have adequately met the needs of the community and built it up as an option for them to create a business opportunity. The Farm Credit Canada is a larger has a larger capital base than the BDC right now because agriculture is a big business, but we've been prevented from participating in that industry. So now that we're going to be inserting Indigenous into agriculture, into crop, into livestock, and other innovative, maybe organic type of businesses, we just have to provide them with that option, adequate information, good capacity programs, financing suite available, and maybe some equity programs from even the First Nations to take away that 10% requirement. Like these things is a whole financing package that's required for their partnerships, to align partnerships. Right now, it's been one individual going and trying to get something done, but not really having all the support in place. And I think we're going to get to a point where, you were talking about ESG earlier. I think going forward, social impact investing is a huge opportunity for capital to be raised. And the millennials have a whole different requirement for their money. They want to see a social good come out of their money, not just a return. And I think it's $42 trillion going to be transferred to the millennials from the baby boomers over the next 25, 30 years. So there's going to be a lot of money, and everybody's going to be looking at it through a lens of what's the social good that's going to come from this. So if we're returning Indigenous people to their original industry in agriculture, I think everybody's going to love that feel good story. So we just have to continue these conversations and create the programs, get the government on board with enabling all that capital and capacity to be created.
Fantastic, thank you. Nevon, I will turn to you. And we've talked about that a lot of Indigenous agriculture is in the early stages, and there's historical reasons for that. What does it look like when the business does mature? What is the scale of the kind of projects that you're seeing across your desk, and what should Indigenous nations looking 10, 20 years ahead of time think towards?
Yeah, well, and I think Shannon, you kind of hit on that right off the bat. Is the really at the level where I kind of support the market. I'll be honest, I don't have any clients of Indigenous background right now, unfortunately. We just because we don't see them, right? And that poses some of the challenges to when we do look at one. How do we deal with it? Is it a First Nations community, or is this is a farm or an agribusiness? So it's the challenge is, as a financer, we don't get to look at these very often, right? Doesn't mean we can't, doesn't mean we won't. It's just we don't get the opportunity now, and I think that's kind of the reason this whole panel has been brought together. Is there's an opportunity in the market? How can we kind of start to bring down some of those barriers so we do get that opportunity? We know what to do with it. So that's the first piece. But some of the other ones, and I'll be honest, I don't have a real deep, background. There's probably some very successful ones across the country. In my world, in kind of southern Saskatchewan, I know of a couple that have been very successful, and the challenge is they're just very few and far between at any kind of scale. Now I do know, and Shannon, you talked about this. There's a lot of funding available, and I think that's probably one of the opportunities is to leverage some of that funding And I look when Thomas Benjoa reached out to me originally when I was asked to be on this panel. Again, I have the privilege. I worked with Thomas in his previous life when he worked for the Royal Bank. I got to know him quite well. Is when we start looking at Indigenous and agriculture, is to not just get short-sighted at a bison operation or a cow-calf operation, is to look a little bit bigger, and rather being just part of the value chain, to be able to control the value chain, right? And participate at all in the different levels, because you have access to the land, you've got access to people, you got access to technology. Can you access the funding that's available so you can be part of that chain? So that was my coaching to Thomas: is don't be short-sighted. Look a little bit bigger. Look at 20,000 feet, and then we'll see what we can achieve. So.
And Nevon, you mentioned before when we talked too about what a bank or an investor looks for in a business. The years of building a balance sheet, I think you said. So what are the things that need to be in place to start to attract the bigger investments from the private market?
Yeah, so that just kind of falls into the fundamentals of lending, right? Is what makes any business venture successful? One is a balance sheet to start, right? Or do you have the access to capital? So it kind of just gets into the fundamentals, right? The balance sheet. Do you have the liquidity to make it go? And then do you have the knowledge and the management team to put it together? So those are the opportunities, is kind of creating that balance sheet, building that wealth, and getting some wealth initially to put it together so you can leverage it, with people, with financiers like myself. And then, do you have the management team to manage through that kind of piece of it? Because then that kind of gets into maybe some of the other questions. There's a lot of risk management tools that are out there that the governments have put together through Saskatchewan crop insurance, and there's other producers out there for margin insurance to help mitigate some of the risks. And this is more on the primary agriculture side. But once you're up and running, you can manage your risks quite well. It is one of the challenges of the ag industry is it's very capital intensive. I think all of us would agree that, right? You just don't put together $10,000 and start farming. If you want to do it at any kind of scale, it is very, very capital intensive. So.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about more on that while we're on the subject of investment risks. And you're all representing lenders at the end of the day, financial institutions. So what are the investment risks that you see are involved in First Nations agriculture? And how can these be mitigated, or how can people demonstrate to you that they've been mitigated? Jennifer, maybe I'll start with you. I don't know what your criteria is, or if it's just a matter of 10% equity, or what other kinds of things do you guys look at in terms of risk mitigation when you're giving out loans?
Okay, so it's actually 20% equity, not 10%. And CF is unique. We can actually take security on reserve through a BCR, because we are considered to be a First Nation organization, and our clients who are on reserve can pledge their pledge collateral from equipment and animals as security for the loans, and we can go in and repossess if necessary. But that is additional security for us, so it's a bit lower risk, even though our clients are considered to be higher risk. A lot of my clients have come from farming families, so it's something that's been learned through generations. Very rarely do I have someone who's just like, hey, I want to have some cattle kind of thing. A lot of my clients have grown up on farms, whether it be small 10-headed cattle farms or larger full-scale family operations. So while there is a risk in cattle, I don't have any clients in grain right now. I had one a few years ago, but he got out of that. From a risk perspective, my clients are considered to be high-risk clients, because we do take a bit of a risk on credit history, that sort of thing. But it's considered to be lower risk because there is concrete collateral to repossess should it ever come to that. But at CF, we tend to work with the clients as much as we can to make sure that they are successful in the future.
Thanks. Shannon, how about you guys? How would you guys see risk in Indigenous agriculture? And what are some ways that you might mitigate it? And we'll talk about federal programs and then how government programs can support next too.
Well, I think it all comes down to capacity and support in place for an agriculture business. I think BDC has a mentorship program that's connected to their lending, it improves the loan by about 25%. So when you have a good mentorship or some business courses that go hand in hand with the loan, then that'll reduce the risk that much more. And I think this is where we need to get to is a process and a system in place where we're supporting agriculture businesses within the nations as much as possible. Um, I say we're at the beginning of something at the time because I don't see those support services in place. I really don't. I don't see the programs out there. I know that they brought on Sean Sunias at the FCC recently, so FCC is going to start creating their programming. Great, and you need to do that. And I think all other lenders need to look at that same sort of lens to create programs and services specific to the needs of the Indigenous entrepreneur because we're coast to coast to coast. There's so much opportunity. We're such a large community, and every region is very different. So they're going to be into something different, and you really have to have those expertise to help them along the way. Scalability. You're you know farms now. You're not successful unless you have 500 acres out in the west, and that means you need a tractor that needs at least 5 acres just to turn around. Like these are $500,000 machines, and when we're talking about financing, it's beyond the AFI's ability to finance just that one tractor. So that's why we've got this growth fund. We've got mainstream lenders. We've got a partnership with FCC that's contributing to this growth fund that we created. So they're part of the growth fund. So as we require more financing, I'm sure that our partners will participate more. And as the social impact investors that are lining up to participate see that there is a way to deploy the capital, so our Indigenous entrepreneurs are creating the enterprises and people are seeing a return on that investment, we're going to see more and more capital available. So as far as scalability, we got to build up the capacity so that everybody sees it as sees themselves taking a risk on a big operation and buying the big tractor. And I think communities, we probably have a better opportunity to share some of those resources so multiple farmers can take advantage of that. Because in the mainstream, I think most farmers have their own.
Thanks. Nevon, I'll pass it over to you now. I mean, you brought up the subject, so you've already spoken a little bit about it, but where, again, from a traditional banking perspective, are you seeing the most risk and how can First Nations entrepreneurs and nations and Métis, entrepreneurs mitigate some of that?
Yeah, there's, with any new industry, anytime you go into a new industry, there's always risks, to whether it's we'll bring up a Domino's pizza franchise or, you're going into a buys and operate. There's risks and there's startup risks and you try to manage that with, a healthy balance sheet, good management team. So First Nations aren't unique to that sense. That's a challenge that we're all going to work through in that opportunity. And you mitigate those, with management teams and balance sheets. And where I was going was and I was more thinking about production agriculture, farmers, there's some really great government support programs out there through crop insurance both on the beef industry as well as on the grains industry, to produce, protect margins. There's also a number of, private ones, margin insurance. So when you do get to that spot, make sure you leverage those capabilities because I know as a lender, that's kind of, pardon the expression, that's usually the cost to get on the ride is did you have a good risk management policy, right? If you can't answer that question, we're probably not getting to the next step. So in leveraging those products, leveraging the knowledge, there's some tremendously knowledgeable people out there in the industry that are experts in that and leverage those people. So that gets into kind of how do you mitigate some of those production risks specific to production agriculture.
Great. Well, let's get on. I know Shannon's been anxious to get to this question, but think about government programs. And I'm glad you brought up Sean Sunias. He used to be the executive director of the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network. So he's a good friend of mine. And of course, with the election call, he was slated to be on this panel, but they all had to keep quiet, for the whole period that they're of the writ until the election's over, which will be, when this conference airs. But that's why Sean can be with us. But I think, just the fact that his position now exists in FCC shows that they're thinking about it and they were moving towards doing some, better things in Indigenous agriculture. And there's, the typical things I think that Nevon talked about that, with agriculture in Canada, we understand the cycles and the risks, and we built in some financing mechanisms to address those. But I think what you were referring to, Nevon, is really about the building the capacity, getting the mentoring, getting the coaching, so that Indigenous entrepreneurs are the good management team, have that experience, have that expertise. And so, what if you were, prime minister for a day and you could allocate funds however you want? What are the programs that you would want to see in Indigenous agriculture? What are the gaps there?
Sorry, Heather, was that question directed to me or was that to Jen and
I'll
Shannon?
start with Shannon, and then maybe Jennifer, and then Nevon. Did I say Nevon? I meant Shannon.
That's okay.
Okay, perfect. So if I was prime minister for the day, which I wouldn't want the job, I would look at something within our network that we've refined over the past 35 years, which is adequate business support services. Individuals like Jennifer that are right there on the front lines working with farmers, with people that want to start businesses. If you don't have people like Jennifer that are there to work with somebody through the application process, through working on a business plan template, working with industry experts, you know, uh, linking up with FCC on certain programs and services, then that farmer's not going to get very far down the path. We need more individuals on the ground to help work with Indigenous entrepreneurs, especially in agriculture. We only have 5 specific AFIs within our network out of 59, but a lot of the AFIs do provide agriculture loans because it is a big industry type. 10% of all of our loans go towards it. Capacity programs. I still think that in order to create that opportunity in the mind of an Indigenous person, you really need to give them that sense that they're part of that industry. We have a lot of successful Indigenous agriculture businesses across the country. I think we need to really showcase those. We need to show people that they can sit in those boots and do that work. Um, Agriculture, almost in a sense, the way that it's marketed shows that it's unattainable. You see that $500,000 machine, and nobody sees them owning a tractor like that, or putting up a 15,000 square foot barn, and all these things that you have to do right now to do factory farming. It just doesn't seem like it's a risk that people want to take. So we have to introduce the whole concept of a pathway to those large operations. You start with the smaller operations, and then you gradually grow it up. But you have to provide capacity programming all throughout that process. And then in order to move capital within the Indigenous community, it's good to have an enabling support program. With FI Network, we've had an Aboriginal business financing program, which is an equity contribution towards a loan or a business that buys down that risk. Now, it was created initially to allow mainstream financiers de-risk that project so that they do provide a loan to an Indigenous entrepreneur, because our experience and our history before that was a bunch of no's, right? So by providing an enabling contribution to an agriculture business, enables that loan to happen and that business to start, but then having business go out would be very important. And initially having some capacity. Those are three of the things that I would say that would be required.
Well, I think you'd make a very good prime minister for a day. So thanks for that great answer. Jennifer, you have, a slightly more grassroots perspective, I guess. You see, very real what the hurdles and the barriers are, to individual entrepreneurs and communities. What are some of the programs that you think could help them, move forward faster?
Well, we do have, like Shannon said, we do have the contribution program at SEEF here as well. It's run by a different department. They provide up to $100,000 for a contribution towards your business project, as well as help finding a plan writer, sorry, and as well as providing funds for the business plan as well, because they can be quite costly. So that contribution helps them grow a larger business from the start, which is very helpful when someone is just starting out. They need animals, they need equipment, they need everything to start off with. So it'd be quite daunting for like the average person just to come in and be like, "Hey, I want to start a farm, but you'd make an income doing this." And it's very difficult to just walk in and just start farming. So yeah, we do have that support. With the contribution program, the equity requirement to put down is reduced to 10%. But still, if someone needs $200,000 for the total project, they need to contribute $20,000. So that's also still quite a bit of funds to save up over a course of however long to come up with for $20,000 to start a farm. So what I would suggest is that we have like additional supports, like at the band level, or like a different program to help people get that liquid capital to start off their operations with.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are very constructive, practical suggestions. And then finally, Nevon, I'll turn it over to you, probably a slightly different perspective on this question.
Yeah. So I think it's probably two things I'd like to cover off. One is we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's some great structures, Jennifer and Shannin are the perfect examples of that. Is just let's give them access to more. So not limit them to $50,000 loans. Maybe it's $5 million loans, and obviously different terms and conditions go there. So that's the first piece, because there's a network there. Let's just leverage it, right? And the second piece is the ability to partner, right? And so I look at some of the clients that I work with, extremely intelligent groups, well capitalized kind of things, but maybe their limitation is they don't have access to the land. Their limitation is access to land. So then to me it's a logical fit to put the two worlds together and partner, right? Bring the resources over here and put them together. So that's the biggest opportunity, I think, is how can First Nations communities partner with the existing enterprises that are out there, that are successful, that have that track record, that balance sheet, and then how can they can take two and leverage it even more. So that's the kind of the big picture, 30,000 fit. That's where I see ag going in North America, or at least in Western Canada, in the world I work in. So.
Well, these are, great comments, and it makes me start to think also, we've talked about production. I think maybe people think of agriculture as crops and as livestock. But as we know, agribusiness is a big business. And so, you talked already about, billions of dollars invested in canola crushing. And we've seen some success, I think more so in manufacturing with Indigenous owned manufacturing facilities. And I think there's an easier training path to get people involved in manufacturing than, for example, there's in agriculture. So, what about some of the opportunities outside of production and kind of that value added chain? Where Western Canada is looking to be really a global leader in a lot of these things. What are some of the opportunities or some of the barriers that you guys are seeing in Indigenous nations entrepreneurs getting involved in the value added? Who wants to start?
Well, back in the day, 20 years ago, I was a business development officer doing Jennifer's work, and I was working with the Wata Mohawks out of northern central Ontario. And so they have a cranberry farm there, and what they've done is that they've been doing cranberry farming for decades, and they have quite an operation there. And what they did is they added a value add. So they added a facility that enables them to do vacuum package. So they started to make craisins. I guess that's what I don't know if the Ocean Spray has the branding on it. It was a craisin type of product, and they did multiple products from that. So I think that doing the value add in creating new products is kind of an innovative way that I think Indigenous people can participate within agriculture in another way.
And I think in some, I know a lot of people in northern Saskatchewan who have done, there's some good success with wild rice, with mushrooms, with specific, herbs or plants that are, non-medicinal, but that can be used, in soaps or makeups and things like that. And it, in some cases might be more culturally, appropriate, or that there's, a lot of experience with it, where sometimes with crop growing, it's something very new that people kind of have to start from scratch. Jennifer, are you seeing, that kind of value add even at a small scale or going into a bigger scales with any nations?
I've had some individuals apply for loans to start off wild rice harvesting. So that's the extent of from what I've seen on my side. My clients are mainly into cattle.
Well, they must see a market opportunity there then.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, I've heard a lot of, First Nations after the pandemic, um, thinking about food security and just, having more, production in Saskatchewan. I know with meat processing was something that people have talked about. Nevon, how about yourself? What are you seeing, kind of maybe at a bigger scale, at a market scale, on the value added side that are opportunities that you would recommend Indigenous clients start to look towards?
Yeah, like I said, like I opened up with, there's this tremendous opportunity in the market because we're seeing that just accelerate very quickly. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing any First Nations participating in that today. Now I know there's a few projects that are being worked on and talked about, and they'll come to fruition. There's a great program in Saskatchewan called PIC, with the Protein Institute, which is looking at investing lots of capital to help accelerate those. I encourage you to leverage those to the maximum. Far as specific industry, I don't know if I'd even want to go out on a limb and say, it's pea splitting or, lentil soup. Just because the sky's the limit when it comes to that. And, there's food security, there's value add, and, it's taking Saskatchewan from strictly an export province into, participating in the value chain. So I don't know if I'm qualified to say, hey, go into pea splitting. This is the place to be. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I just think when you look at the value chain and the ag industry, participating in it somewheres is a good thing.
Good answer. Good, safe answer. We didn't have any federal officials on this call, but you've been able to have a nice political safe answer there, anyways. So just taking a slightly different tack, there's also a big difference, and maybe people outside of Indigenous business don't always see it, between entrepreneurs looking for financing and communities or community-owned businesses looking for financing, and they're often at quite different scales. What are the different considerations that you take into, or that you think people applying for funding have to take into, whether they're an individual entrepreneur versus a community-owned business? Maybe Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Well, for community-owned businesses, it's typically a larger scale, and they need more financing capacity than we're able to give here at SIEDN. We have like a maximum of $300,000 for a total project, so that can be a limitation for someone wanting to start a large-scale business. And as well as we are developed by the lender. What that means is our interest rate is higher. So our interest rate is sitting at 12.5%. So that's quite significantly more than like Nevon can offer people who want to start off a community-owned business, which is why I see mainly a lot of smaller entrepreneurs who want to start small and grow not even want to grow big. They want to just go to like a medium level, just something they can do outside of their regular day jobs, kind of thing.
Super, thanks. Shannin, how about you? What is the difference in the approach, the risk, the strategy if you're an individual entrepreneur versus a community-owned business?
Well, I think you just look at the business plan and what the plan is. I think the community has a lot more advantage because they have the support of the uh, community capital behind them. They have access to individuals, government programs. When they're putting together their business case for as an individual, it's like exactly what Jennifer said: is they're coming to present what they need and what they want, and generally they want to start small and gradually. Am I able to get to that previous question that because we were talking about opportunities, and I wouldn't mind adding something else.
Yeah, for sure. Please do.
Okay, so we were talking about food security. Now this is a sort of an untapped area that's a growth area all across Indigenous land. I know within my own community for the past 20, 25 years, they've been doing a farmer's market just to introduce vegetables and all the food, different types of, just to create the palette for the people. And they've got to a point where they crave kale, they crave all this stuff that you have to bring into the community. And there's different businesses that are available where you can bring in the sea cans that are the greenhouse, right? I think that this is a big opportunity for the north. And so the communities that have food security issues create their own greenhouse operations, grow their own food. I think aquaculture, with the fish and the growing vertical farming, Like, this is all innovative stuff, and I think that this is just still, again, the beginning of introducing this stuff to the communities so that they can implement it in their own backyard.
Super. And I remember I was part of a Northern Greenhouse conference a couple of years ago, and so much has happened in that field since. And I think there's probably, there's some opportunities. I think if you're close to a mine or some other major project, provide some, there are some small business opportunities certainly that I think can arise out of those, Northern greenhouse or CCAN or kinds of projects. Nevon, I'll just turn it back to you. I think probably in your line of work, you're much more likely in the next 5-10 years as Indigenous agriculture ramps up to see community-owned businesses as applicants for those seeking investment. What's your perception of kind of the landscape there?
Yeah, no, and definitely, I think we're all on the exact same page on that. When I look at the community, they have a distinct advantage. Be quite honest, they have a borrowing power, right? And as well, then we have a model. So, for example, in the Royal Bank, whatever community it is, we have specialists. We have a whole team of specialists that specialize in dealing with First Nations communities, right? In whatever type of financing structure. And then I'll be honest, they're going to leverage somebody like myself if they want to look at some type of value add in the ag industry, because that's the expertise that I bring. So yeah, in that case, a community is a distinct advantage over, just one individual trying to start, particularly with any kind of scale, for sure.
Great, thanks. Well, we're closing in on some of the final discussion questions here. So I'm going to throw it out to all of you, kind of thinking again, kind of broader visionary. But what is the pathway going to look like? And you alluded to this, Shannin, that we need to think, kind of step by step, thinking what the next 5 years looks like and the next 10 years looks like, so we can get to those, bigger, more complex businesses in the future. For each of you, what does that pathway look like to get more First Nations and Métis entrepreneurs and communities involved in agriculture from a financing perspective? What are the pieces that need to be in place for all this to happen in a timely and productive manner? Jennifer, I might start with you.
Well, from what I see, like support structures are very important, whether it be through government supports that way, or even support at community level to have someone to contact to give people a nudge in the right direction to know where to go for financing, for support, even for mentorship. And with availability of land coming up, I would say that utilizing the land for pursuits in agriculture would be more beneficial for both the individual as well as the nation itself to develop businesses that way.
Great, thanks so much. Shannin, how about yourself?
Well, if we're looking at a 5-year plan, I think promoting agriculture as an option for communities and individuals is a good first start. But a lot of communities won't be able to plan around uncertainty. So providing some land tenure, settling claims. If the government can just look at this video and say, you know what, we got to settle the claims for communities so that we can look like Canada wants prosperity. And Canada's not going to have prosperity without Indigenous prosperity. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen anymore. So we're going to have to get on the same page and be partners with this. So how do we get Indigenous people to participate in prosperity? Well, we need adequate financing, and we're starting to put together some of that. Social impact investors are going to participate. Okay, so Canada, step up and do your part. Provide some tax incentive for the investors to participate. Provide some granting to enable the businesses to start. Provide the right people on the front lines, agriculture specialists, right there in the community, so they can work with Indigenous entrepreneurs that want to start businesses, and then provide some good business support in place so that they can support this, because it's almost like we're restarting this old industry that we refined and perfected way back in the day, right? There's three sisters. You have corn, you have beans that climb up the corn, and you have squash that protect the bottom. Like, this is innovative things that our people did to ensure that the sustainability of our lands and production and bugs and all this stuff. We've lost all that, and it's kind of like we have to recreate this and relearn this. We got to put back into place all these learnings, all these support systems, And then our communities, as soon as they have the land and they see the capital right there, they're going to see that that's an opportunity, and that's what we need to.
Thanks so much. Nevon, on to you. What do you think that path looks like? How do you think you're going to get to a place where you have, nations coming to you in 5 years, 10 years, looking for, big $10 million projects?
First of all, I hope it's not. I hope I don't have to wait 5 years. I'll be honest. I'd like to look at one next week. But I think the biggest thing would be, while there's always opportunity to do better, there is programs and funding available. And I think it's probably to make sure the communities know what's aware and what's available to them. That's probably the first step. So it comes back to an education piece. And the second piece is, don't look just at primary agriculture. I just don't want to be a farmer and grow melons or corn or beef cows or bison. Think there's more to the ag industry than just that. That's just the first step in the chain, is thinking about the different rungs to get to the ultimately, to the fork that sits on the plate that we all eat on this panel. So that would be my guidance, is think big, and think about agriculture more than just production agriculture. There's much more to the industry than that, as you can participate in the value chain. And I think I've repeated that a number of times today on the panel, is talking about being the part of the value chain rather than just one cog in the wheel kind of thing.
Thanks. Now I might have one last question before I give you guys a bit of time for some closing comments. But and this builds on what you all just said. But what would happen if Indigenous nations don't get involved in agriculture? What would that mean for Saskatchewan's economy? What would that mean for Western Canada and for the Canadian economy and for the future of agriculture? What are the risks that we have if we don't do this well, if we don't get the financing in place and build the capacity, so then Indigenous nations are full partners in the Canadian agricultural sector? Jennifer, did you want to start?
Sure. From that question, what I would see is that agriculture would be less rich. It would be less. Would have less deep knowledge about land use and how these systems work synergistically. So, yeah, that's about all I have to say about that.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Nevon, how about yourself? What are the risks if we don't do this well?
So I think the risk could be it's a significant lost opportunity, just because we have huge amounts of land, under control of First Nations. We have the resources, so it's there, right? Why not just be able to capitalize it? And as well, you could go down the road of, it's kind of our duty as we work through truth and reconciliation, is to help people do better, right? That's kind of a fundamental basis of all of us now going forward. So I think that's kind of the opportunity, right? Is there's an opportunity there. Let's make sure that everybody can be successful and participate in this.
Thanks, Nevon. And finally, Shannin, for yourself, what are the risks if we don't do this well, if Indigenous peoples aren't big contributors and beneficiaries from the agricultural sector?
Well, I think it's good to look at the finances. You know that the Canadian government spent $9 billion on Indigenous services in '96. Last year, they spent $17 billion. In 25 years, it's going to be $40 billion. Unless we help the communities to become self-sustaining and have some sort of economic base and create some sort of other revenues, it's going to be an unsustainable system. Never mind that Indigenous communities have more rights and title, and they're going to be asserting that. There's more land becoming available. As a settlement of those land claims, there's going to be more and more land available. So having that land sit there and not do anything is not going to. We're growing at 4 times the national average. Like, Canada is aging out a little bit. So this is a great opportunity for Indigenous people to enter into this food security for the world. Like, we've got huge land base here in Canada. We can provide a lot of products and services to the global economies. I think we don't stop. We want Indigenous people participate and are prosperous, and this is a great industry to get into.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm going to give you guys each about 2 or 3 minutes. If you have any closing comments, things you just wanted to highlight, things that we didn't touch on, just make sure you get all the audience, gets the full benefit of all your knowledge and your thinking on this subject. So I'll go in the same order: Jennifer, then Nevon, then Shannin.
Okay, well, I definitely see like a lot of opportunity for Indigenous people to participate in agriculture, either individually or at the nation level, because there's definite opportunities there to either start small and grow bigger, or even just enter in a medium level and if that's where you are, and then grow bigger that way. There are supports available. There is financing available. CEF is here to help with the financing needs that way. We do take collateral on reserve, so we are unique in that way. And we also have contribution program here in the office as well. So we both have contribution grant program as well as financing within one office. So we really do provide full, well-rounded advice and options for our clients who do come to CEF.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Jennifer. Nevon, on to you.
Yeah, so my closing comment would be, again, while I am very passionate about the ag industry, born and bred in it my entire life, and I'll probably spend my whole entire career and lifetime very close to the ag industry, that's no surprise. If I'm thinking of somebody who's maybe on the outside of the industry and looking in, and maybe this is the first opportunity they're watching this session, which is a great session, is to not be scared of it, right? It's a different industry. Leverage it. There's great experts, Jen, Shannin, those teams. Leverage them. You don't have to come in and farming 20,000 acres and have 12 John Deere combines. That is agriculture. That is large scale. It would be very daunting to start there. But you know what? Why don't you start with leverage the programs that are available, through Jennifer, and work towards that, and have a bit of vision to see, I don't want to just be at 10 cows. I'd like to be at 5,000 cows and have a meatpacking facility that employs 40 people from my community, and we export beef around the world. And just think, aim a little bit high, and so that would be my coaching. Get in industry. It's a great industry, and reach out to the resources. The people on this interview are all passionate about it. That's for sure.
Thanks so much, Nevon. You're a very good poster child for Saskatchewan agriculture industry. You make me want to be a farmer. All right, and then finally, Shannin, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, if listening to an Indigenous person that's thinking about agriculture, I'd say that, this was our original industry. This before contact, we were very rich. We had trade routes. We traded corn. We traded nuts. We traded everything that you can think. Buffalo meat and everything. We had a trade system. Our people were very good at this. Unfortunately, the legislation, policies, and the settlers wanting to take our land removed us from this industry. So we're very capable. We're starting to get the financing in place. We're gonna try to create capacity programs to support you. It's going to be a good risk to take, I think, because Indigenous people weren't going anywhere out of this land, and we're not going to be going anywhere. It's good to be using this land to produce our food security for the future. And like Nevon said, there's all kinds of different levels that you can create a business at. And so thinking of what it is that you want to do within agriculture and going for it, because we're putting together the support you, and we're going to find the people to help along the way. So take that chance. Thank you.
Well, I just want to give a big hearty thank you to our 3 panelists, Jennifer, Nevon, and Shannin. This was a great discussion. I've been involved in Saskatchewan's, Indigenous economic development kind of scene for a long time, and we don't talk enough about finance, and we don't talk enough about agriculture, and especially we never put the two together. So it's fantastic to get your expertise and your perspectives. Because I think we all do know it's critical to get that investment and that financing in place to grease the wheels and have that pathway for First Nation and Métis communities to get more involved in agriculture in Canada. And that's necessary for the sector, it's necessary for communities, for the provinces, for the country, for all of us to have that strong, healthy agricultural sector going forward. So thank you all. Thanks to the organizers. It's been my pleasure moderating this panel, and I'll sign off now. Enjoy the conference, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.